After 2 years, the teacher says, now you can sit in the middle part of the hall. Now you can kind of hear some things, but it's quite incoherent. After a few more years, the teacher looks at him and says, now you can sit front row. Ah, you feel so special. But it took 15, 20 years for you to get up there. And so, and now you hear him, but you can't understand anything that this guy is saying. You know, you hear something, you listen, then you hear to what you're listening, and then you try to make sense, but nothing makes any goddamn sense. That pisses you off. And, but at least you can kind of bask in your teacher's presence. Then one day the teacher looks at his disciples and says, when this guy comes in, kick him out. He said, kick him out? What do you mean kick him out? He's been like serving us all the stuff for the past 20 years. We can't kick him out. And whatever teacher says, you say yes. He is your son. If you lose the son, you'll be a frozen dead earth. Okay? So he comes in and he gets all busted up, as they say. You know, and he looks at the teacher and says, hey, don't you know me? No, I have no idea who you are. First, you remove the attachment to this, then you remove the attachment to this, then you remove the attachment to this, then you remove your attachment, because eventually what happens is the student becomes so attached to the teacher that the student is like this earth, the teacher is like the sun. As the earth falls further and further from the sun, it gets really, really cold, dark, and eventually it'll freeze and die. That's what happens. When you're not in the presence of your teachers, you have this longing, this yearning. You feel as if life has nothing to offer you. The only thing life has to offer you is this person, and he doesn't pick up your phone calls. All right? Then, no one in the town talks to him. No one buys anything that he creates, eventually out of depression. And that's the other thing you need to understand. You need depression. It's healthy. You need loneliness. Despite all the pain it creates, they are things that generate the proper emotions inside you after you've been trained well. He goes into the cemetery because that's the only place he goes to be amongst the dead. And he's so exhausted. He prays, but no answer. Not from the teachers, not from the teachers' students, not from the gods. And out of exhaustion, he just falls asleep. And he has a dream. See, 30 years had to pass by before he can actually have a significant dream layered with messages. That he has this image of God coming to him, image that he has the ability to accept and receive and has a capacity for. And kind of he has a conversation with this particular image, and he wakes up. He has loved, and now God has given him wisdom. But this wisdom remains in abstract. It hasn't yet been tested. Remember, you need to bring wisdom down to iron. You need to bring wisdom to bronze. You need to bring wisdom to silver, because you are ultimately a person of society. You are a person of people. That's what compassion is. You give people not money, you give them wisdom. With wisdom, they can put their life back together. Okay, so it has a very earthly tone to it. So the teacher knows what he has done. He goes to the cemetery, and the moment the student sees the teacher, says, how could you do this to me? I've served you for 20 years. And the teacher says, I had to slowly detach you from everything that was familiar to your life. And the ultimate obstacle in your life was me, your teacher. I had to make sure that you are completely detached from me. And in your detachment, the only thing that you will eventually become attached to is God. Instead of coming to me and asking me questions, you will go to God. But for that to happen, to ask the right questions, it had to take all these trials and errors, about 20 years of effort. Okay? Now, so every teacher has his or her own special exercises, fastings, diets of sorts, the way you should be. And then what's going to happen after you, again, fall in love and you're able to receive the instructions? Next is what we call Jnana Yoga, is the yoga of knowledge. That first you become absorbed in love, you're one with love, then you become one with the exercises given to you. Then you have to become one with wisdom, the wisdom of your teacher. But you're not there yet. So initially what you have is a good amount of information, okay? Information will eventually turn into knowledge, things to hear, and imitation, plagiarism is extremely important. You memorize and you imitate the things of your teacher. You can't have your own voice just yet. You can't exercise freedom. You're not there yet. Okay? It's not enough that you're able to run or walk, because you still have to cross the streets, and you don't know the dangerousness of cars just yet, of falling and getting bruised just yet. Now, what happens in hearing your teacher speak is that initially you're going to hear. You're going to hear just words, and they're really, for the most part, just noise. What usually happens when you hear things, most of us have triggers. I'm going to speak for an hour, but out of the hour, you will only hear 5 minutes of the things I'm saying, and the 5 minutes has to do with some of the things I've said that you have taken in, have they triggered something about you that refers to your past. You're not listening to me. You're listening to the stories of your past, and I don't care for that. I need you to hear me. But for that to happen, you hear. Sometimes I say some things that inspires listening. You pay attention. And in every act of listening, you're going to have messages. Then you will be able to hear the messages. Okay? Most often we just hear gossip. With your teacher, hearing turns into listening. Okay? In the listening, you begin to hear messages, but you won't yet understand them. Here is only a place of inspiration. There is you, there are the wisdom that comes out of your teacher's mouth. You're not yet in a yogic position. There's a good amount of separation or space or gap between you and wisdom. Once in a while, your union with the wisdom, and it happens all the time. Once in a while, your union with wisdom gives you a different sense of self. You have a different image of yourself. And you need those conflicts, because the wisdom creates a different sense of self. You take that to your friends. They inspire a different conversation. You engage, you hate yourself afterwards. Your attachment to a teacher grows because you don't want to be around conversation that contains superficialities. Okay? Now, if your teacher is any good, what he or she will tell you eventually, which is your last stage, is called, I think it's karma or dharma yoga, one of those. That because human beings are creatures of society, and because other people live in society, and because people have desires and they can't but have desires, You need to guide them to have the proper desires. And one of the nicest stories they have in Hinduism is the story of Kalupatra. It's about this teacher sitting with a bunch of kids and telling them a story about this tree. It's a tree that when kids approach this tree and ask this tree for things, the tree gives it to them immediately. And so as he's talking about this particular tree that brings desires to life, all of a sudden the teacher stops, looks at the kids and says, "Oh, that's the tree right there." And you know how 5-year-olds are. They all run to the tree. One says Spider-Man, the other says Sonic, the other says Batman, the other says Spider-Man, the other says, coffee, or if in Oakland, gone, or drugs. And of the 1,000 kids that run to the tree, one stays behind. And the teacher looks at this kid rather curiously and says, "Don't you want to run to the tree?" He says, "I've been sitting here watching my friends go to the tree and ask. And I realize all they ask for is ice cream. And they have bucket after bucket of ice cream. And they're all like in pain. Look at them. Indigestion, diarrhea, bellyache, tummy ache. I don't want to end up like that. I've come to realize that freedom, desires are actually quite dangerous. I want to make sure I desire the right things so I don't suffer. I don't become miserable like my friends." Okay? So what you have in the last stage of intimacy, in other words, you, wisdom, and then ultimately just human life, is that take all that you have learned from your teacher, take it into society. Okay? And give them a thing or two if they have ears that hear. Do you have any questions before we jump into Buddhism? We have about half hour. We can probably cover Buddhism in half hour. Anyone?
So is this pertaining to Hinduism?
What do you care?
Everything you just spoke about. Just because we've been talking about Hinduism.
Yes.
In what aspect? Is this what Hinduism is about?
This is what a couple of things. I'm not a scholar of Hinduism. In other words, I didn't read lots of books on Hinduism so that I can come to class and just tell you what Hinduism says. I have taken the things that I can relate to, and then I kind of like make my own dish, and I pretend as if it's Hinduism. But it is Hinduism. That's how things work. So if your question is, I'm going to study religious studies, and tomorrow I have a quiz and my teacher is going to ask about Hinduism, can I write this stuff down? The answer is no. You'll probably fail the class. Why is it important?
I just wanted to see if this related to Hinduism at all.
It does. Yeah.
I just thought that would have been a perfect moment to add in sideshows.
The what?
I said that would have been a perfect moment to add in the sideshows,
Oh, yeah.
The trees.
Yeah.
What desires would you ask for?
Me? At where I am right now? Given that about 85% of the human population have horrifying deaths, that they're diagnosed with cancer or some incurable disease, and they end up in the hospital with tubes and machines, it's a really awful way to go, because you're really just entirely in the grips of your physical body, and your brain turns into mush. Everything about your life kind of just vanishes. it's good to just go to sleep and not wake up. I'm not saying like today, like, like 50 years from now. Just put my head down and, yeah,
A peaceful passage.
sure. There was a movie, The Green Miles. I don't know if you've seen it, with Tom Hanks and a few other fellows. That this man had this gift, and if he ever liked or loved someone, he would pass on the gift. And one of the tragedies of the gift was that it would make you immortal. So you get married, you see your wife die, then you see your kids die, then you get married again, then again you see your second wife die, and then the second set of kids die. And so you kind of relive all the stuff until you realize that this is no way to live. Death is, in fact, a good release from life. And it's something we didn't talk about in this class when it comes to Hinduism, and perhaps we should. Perhaps we have 15 minutes. It's a book called Katha Upanishad. It's about your relationship with death. And the stronger your relationship with death, the more intimate and intense your relationship with time. And when you begin to reflect on time very seriously, the more intimate your relationship is with the sort of desires you want to have, because desires are what guides you and what propels you to kind of just live life. And so what happens is this kid, Nachakitas, has an argument. It's a relatively stupid argument with his father that he has. Not really stupid. The father keeps giving gods or sacrificing to the gods all these like cheap, ridiculous things. And this kid, who is idealistic, who is innocent, who suffers from a good amount of naivete because his mind hasn't turned into a calculator. He's not like a disciple like Matthew, who's a tax collector. He looks at his father and says, why do you keep like giving gods these old crummy things? Give him some of the new cows that you have. And the father says, shut your mouth. I'm just going to give to the gods, the cows that are limping and blind and almost dead. And he keeps harassing his father. And his father says to him, if you ask me this one more time, I'll give you to Lord Yama, which means the king of death. And eventually the kid asks again, and the father eventually, because in Hinduism, number 3 is very significant, but we won't get into that. He harasses his father 3 times, and his father knows that he has to do what he promised, which was to give his son to Lord Yama. Now, Nachakitas finds himself at the gates. He knocks on the door, but the door doesn't open. First day doesn't open, second day doesn't open, third day doesn't open. Fourth day, he knocks and the door opens. And Yama says, oh, I'm sorry, I went on a vacation, I went to Hawaii. What are you doing here? Yeah, I had a kind of a thing with my father, I'm here. What do you want? And he says to him, since I was late, you had to wait for 3 days, I'll give you 3 wishes. What's the first one? Can I have some chicken tikka masala? I'm really hungry. With some garlic naan. Have you guys had it?
Yeah.
Can you take her? House of Naan and Curry, College and Ashby. It's by this new coffee shop called Decaffeinated or maybe Caffeinated. Great food. And it's cheap. Ask for Ali. They'll give you And so Yama says, fine. What's the second wish? When I go back home, can you make sure that my father still likes me? Done. What's the third wish? I want to know myself. What the hell did he say? I want to know myself. What happens when I die? And, Yama kind of scratches his head and says, don't you want to ask for a wife? Family, like a Tesla or a Lexus? No? Self-knowledge. No, don't do that. Ask for something else. You gave me 3 wishes, man. You fulfilled 2. I want the 3rd one to be fulfilled. Self-knowledge. And he says, oh my God, this is... He says, not even gods ask that question because it's so difficult. And you're a human being. And it's a very difficult journey to go through. You sure you want to know self-knowledge? You sure you want to do that? And that's the thing is, self-knowledge is only obtained through death. Death of your iron desires, death of your bronze desires, death of your silver desires. Right now, you see yourself as a student for this class. You see yourself as a waiter. You see yourself as a son. You see yourself as a boyfriend. You have a history, you have a relationship with time. In other words, in 5 years, you have a PhD. In 5 years, you're going to buy a house. It's all things you can see, touch, and taste. But when you die to all of that, you're exactly what? You're not your past. You're not your future. You're not your physical body. What the hell are you? And it's only when you get to that place where Yama, the king of death, can guide you. And in some ways, you could say that's what teachers really do. They make you quite indifferent to your physical pleasures, to the pleasures of power and the pleasures of family, or just being socialized. You don't care for any of them. And that's a devastating place to be. You want to laugh with your friends, but you can't. You want to be good to your companion, but you can't. You want to take things seriously, but there is nothing down here worth taking seriously. I forgot your question. But see what happens? Oh, yeah, you were talking about death. Anyone else? Okay. So let me then end Hinduism and talk about Buddhism. We have about 15, 20 minutes. If I was to sum up this entire class to maybe just a few words or maybe a concept, it would be this. Religion is not there to get you to God, or it's really there to make sure that you suffer less in this life by having desires that don't have too negative of consequences. There is nothing wrong with sex. Have the wisdom to be intimate with the right person. There is nothing wrong with making money, but have a job that nourishes your soul as well. There is nothing wrong with friendships, as long as they can nourish both your body, your mind, and your soul. You know, because life is difficult. And you and I are not made to go into the caves and live our lives into the cave until we die. We are peoples of the agora, the marketplace, the society. And it's good to know, you know, what sort of advertisements you want your body and your mind and your soul to receive, to what things you want to abstain from. That's all it is. These ideas are simply there to give us wisdom, not that we can become better human beings, but to make sure that we choose the sort of pleasures that don't have too negative of consequences. And if in the process you become better, fine. Okay? Now, one of perhaps the best teachers you will ever find in the sacred traditions is Siddhartha, known later as the Buddha. And if, for example, you want to get to a place in San Francisco, you've never been there, what you do is you type it into MapQuest or Google Maps or something, and then it gives you direction. For those of you who want to kind of understand what the self is, for those of you who want to understand what wisdom is, for those of you who want to understand what detachment is, what depression is, very much like the life of Gilgamesh, very much like what we put on the board, the life of Buddha is yet another set of information in the MapQuest. And it kind of tells you what happens to human beings. Now, the thing you need to remember is that if you're a man, you're very unlucky. If you're a woman, in some ways, you're very, very, very lucky. and these traditions mostly are about men and their confusion and their pursuits. Now, the 21st century human beings, men and women, they've kind of both become contaminated in ways that it's very difficult to repair. But it's important for you to kind of understand that sacred traditions have always involved men. There is something about men's wiring, there's something about men's psyche that's just wrong. They are the ones who leave. They are the ones who enjoy the desert. They are the ones who sit and think and ask difficult questions. Women, on the other hand, they're profoundly grounded. The very fact that they have monthly cycles, and that monthly cycle forces them to detach from almost everything because there is a good amount of pain, and pain makes almost everything irrelevant. There's a great amount of baptism there, solitary life there. The very fact that women can actually give birth and then be devoted, be passive, be forgiving, be compassionate. Whenever you have a mother, what you have in your presence is a sacrificial lamb. They sacrifice who and what they are for the benefits of their kids. Men don't do that. Men don't even come close. So if you're a woman, GPS lives inside you with your organism. A man has to create one. Okay? Now, I don't know if that speaks about modern women or not, but what you need to know again is that sacred traditions, religious traditions have always had kind of men who are a little crazy. There's a woman who gets pregnant, no different than the story of Gilgamesh. And no one knows that she's pregnant except, I guess, her and her husband. And she passes by this very, 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 very weird young woman. I think her name was Moana, or maybe Miana. And if time allows, maybe we'll talk about the movie Moana, because it is really what people have to go through to get to wisdom. Lots of conflict with one's parents, one's tradition, on a journey that makes you all alone. Lots of doubt, lots of fear. You want to give up, but something kind of just pushes you forward. Now, this crazy-looking young woman looks at this pregnant mother and says, "You're pregnant." And this mother-to-be says, "How do you know? My belly is flat. How do you know I'm pregnant? I have magic inside me, I can tell what lives inside people. You're going to have a son. And your son will either become like your husband, who is rich, who's prosperous. He will pursue iron, bronze, and silver. But there is also a chance that he may not pursue them at all. He may come to realize that none of those things really have value. He may go for the gold. And if he goes for the gold, he will hate you for having given birth to him. He will hate, like Job, being alive, because he has a body in this physical world, but there is nothing for him to do in this physical world." And you're talking about 3,000 years ago. People don't really talk like this. You don't harass people like this. But because you're dealing with a shaman, a seer, and for these people who are mavericks, they don't really keep up with social customs. So this mother-to-be is very upset. It's not like today where we make fun of people when they tell us crazy things about our future. People actually believed, such magicians did actually exist. And they had powers. So this woman runs to the husband and says to him, "I just ran into this Jesus Christ of a woman. And she says to me that we're going to have a son. And then she tells to me that our kid will have two choices. It's either the red pill or the blue pill." Now, here's the thing you need to understand. We don't like red pills. We don't like to go on a quest that's unknown to us. We always want to know where we're going. I mean, it's part of who and what we are as a sort of animals that we are. You want to know that your time spent here ultimately gets you a passing grade. You want to know that if you're hanging out with a guy, it'll eventually turn into a monogamous, serious relationship. You want to know that if you buy a car, it's not going to be a lemon. You want to know that if you work for 40 hours a week, your boss, after 2 weeks, has a paycheck waiting for you. We like to know our future. We don't like to walk in the dark. And parents are weird, not so much fathers, but especially mothers, because they're so involved in their kids' lives. And so she says to her husband, he can't go after the gold. I don't want my kid to seek wisdom. I don't even know what wisdom is. I don't want my kid to go to the Lord, the Yama, and ask, who is the self? What is the self? Who cares about that? I'm a mom. I'm a practical animal. I want my kid to grow up, to go to school, get a couple of degrees, get married, have kids. I want to be a grandmother. And the father looks at him and says, fine. Whenever any of us in this classroom have ever asked serious questions about the meaning of life, who we are, what we are, you find yourself in the dark, in the unknown, and it's devastating. And when you can no longer endure the darkness, the confusion, the pain, the dread, the loneliness, you and I run back to what is most familiar. You know what happens when you break up? You've been like this guy for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. You know, you watch movies with him, you have food with him, you have ridiculous conversations with him. He's a stupid guy, but nevertheless. And then he dies. You know, walks around the lake and someone just drowns him. Oakland life. And so you kind of go home and you say, man, you know, I just broke up with this person. There's no one to watch a movie with. And though sometimes perhaps something from your depth says, human beings are always alone. You say, no, that's too heavy of a cross to carry. And so the thing you need to know about the Buddha story, I don't really know if he actually existed, is that all of us in this class have a couple of options only, no more than 2 really. That you will either choose paths that have been paved for us. You know, I used to, when I was much younger, go to Yosemite during wintertime. The winter is a really good time to go to Yosemite. First, the snow blankets the entire space. There is only one campsite that's open, and that's Pine Valley near Curry Village. You know, you put up your tent, snow is everywhere, and you're all alone. Maybe a couple of people. And you wake up in the morning, and as you want to go to the village, to the market to grab yourself some stuff, there's this huge space, and snow is everywhere, and it's beautiful, you know? And you park your car and you say, I'm just gonna walk a little bit. Now it's cold. You have like 25 jackets and 50 pants and 20 shoes. And so you're standing in the middle of the space and you say, okay, I want to walk from point A to point B. Then you look closely at the ground and you realize some people before you have gone, and you say, well, I don't really want to walk in their footprints or footsteps. I want to make my own path. You know how young people stupidly say to themselves, I'm creative, I'm authentic, my parents are jerks, my instructors are nerds, I know better, I'm authentic, yes, I want to be original. So, you know, you take a couple of steps. The first step, you go in like ankle deep. The second step, you go in knee deep. The third step, you go in waist deep. And the deeper you go, the more difficult it is to get yourself out. You know, and as you're like waist deep, it takes you 10 minutes to get yourself out. And now you're sweating. And then you say, what the hell am I going to do with all those clothes? Take them off. If I take them off, I do have to carry them, leave them behind. You take 1 jacket, 2 jackets, 3 jackets, and then you like belly deep. And you look behind you, and then you look in front of you, and you realize you've only taken 5 steps. And you say, oh my God, I have another like 10,000 steps to go. And then there comes a point you say, nah, let me just put my feet in other people's footprints, because now they've turned into ice. They can hold my weight. And you realize you've given up on creating a path of your own. You kind of get yourself back, and then you put yourself in other people's shoes, and now 5 minutes later you're point B. And the point I'm trying to make is that sometimes all of us are inspired. You read the life of the Buddha, you read the life of Jesus, maybe you like J.R. Tolkien, and you say, I want to like check into a hotel, live there for 6 months and write and write and write and write. So all of us are inspired when we see genius and those who have attained relative amount of perfection. But then you take your steps, you realize it's too much work and you're not ready for it. Now, what happens when you have resources and you know that kids walk into a life that is so unknown? Every aspect, every branch, every corner of life has about 90% darkness and only 10% light. Don't ever take your confusing questions to your parents. Don't disturb them. Don't bother them. They are your parents. They don't care about your spiritual growth. What parents mostly care for is that you graduate from school, you go out with people who don't break your hearts, that you have money, you can pay rent, okay? You have a job. Don't ever go to them and say, Dad, I think I want to go on this spiritual quest. You know, that would be the most stupid thing you could ever do to your parents. So keep this stuff to yourself. And that's one of the things you understand about the life of the Buddha. Parents don't care about your spiritual growth. They want to make sure that your iron, your bronze, and your silver stages are fulfilled and they're satisfactory. So the woman goes to, again, her husband and says, I don't want my kid to be a seeker of wisdom. I want my kid to be a seeker of just regular, normal life. And the truth is, regular, normal life is very, very tough. And so the father does something that most fathers and most parents do. What is it that makes you and I think, really reflect deeply about things? Disappointment. When you expect, but your expectations don't come true. And then they force you to think. And then when you think and reflect, you realize how hollow you are really on the inside. Then you are left with a good amount of regret. The less pain you have in your life, and that's hedonism, the more pleasure you have in your life, the less you reflect. And the less you reflect, the happier you are. Okay?
Here, is that?
I'm sorry?
Can you repeat that? You said the less you reflect, the happier you are.
The less you reflect, the happier you are. You take this class for what? 3 units? You take this class for a grade? You take this class for your sister to keep her company, knowing full well that eventually she'll turn out to be like you. There comes a point she'll look at you and say, I don't really care for ideas, for your thoughts. I like this guy. I'm just going to go. And you know what's waiting for her. Reflection makes everything futile. There is nothing at the very bottom of it. The people you choose for your romantic life. You choose them based on what? How do you come to a decision that who is worthy of your body and your mind and your soul? What process do you go through? Nothing. You just go out there. Your organism knows what is attractive. You say hello, and before you know it, you have emotions. And then you use your reflective abilities to figure out what to do with all the emotions that live inside you. And when you really think about how pathetic all the scenario is, you realize how disgusted you are with yourself for making choices with your emotions rather with your intellect. And even if you were to make decisions with your intellect, what exactly are you looking for? Do you have enough life experience to know good from the bad? And the answer is no. That's what reflection does. You know, the only reason why our life is livable, we are like what the Hindus argue, we're like these onions, all these layers. And as long as you don't remove too many layers, you don't see the hollowness that lives at the very center of the onion. There is nothing in it. The only reason why we can function in any sort of a way is we become attached to all these layers. The layers of, I'm a woman, I'm a man, I'm a waitress, I'm a boyfriend, I'm a daughter, I'm taking classes, I'm doing this, I have thoughts, I have a belief system, I'm this, I'm that. Remove all those layers and life will remove them for you. I don't care if you're trans, I don't care if you're bi, I don't care if you're gay. Do you know how to think? No one is exempt from the slings and arrows of life. And if you don't know how to think, you can be straight, you can be a cow, you can be a dog, you can be whatever pronoun you want to give yourself. You will not survive. And the fact that you can go before an audience and talk about gender issues, this issue, that issue, it means nothing. These are all distractions. What remains at the very core issue is that this is a culture that does not encourage reflecting at all. It's a young culture. It's all about hedonism. It's all about pleasure. A little bit reflection, therapy. A little bit more reflection, medication, which ultimately leads to paralysis.
So is reflection not good?
No, reflection is very good. You just need to reflect in a community. You know, when I was very, very young in these gatherings, I felt the darkness, I thought about the darkness, which was just basically all of my life. But all of the stuff was done in the gathering. Hussein once in a while would just drive up to the car wash just to ask, Amir, are you doing okay? He had his house open to us for 10 years. That's a great place to be in darkness and depression if there is someone that can protect it, give it meaning, give it nourishment. You know, add to it the fact that we have a culture that has literature and poetry that talks about depression and loneliness and darkness of life. زمن بشنوی پیراموزگار مکن تکیه بر گردش روزگار که این منزل درد و جای غم است در این دامگه شادمانی کم است. That listen to me, O you who think you're wise. And you know, there is something you need to know about wise people. They want to pretend as if there are things you can do with your life that you will be eternally happy. And that's not true, because the world does not exist to make you happy. It's all a mirage. Life at the very end, from the very beginning to the very end, it's one desire after another. Every desire creates its own struggle. And once you obtain the desire, you're witnessing your own disappointment because it's just boring after a while. Then you learn, I can't do much about, I can't just sit, so you pursue another desire. Chain manzil dard و جای غم است. Life, human life, is home to pain, suffering, sorrow, and disappointment. در این دامگه شادمانی کم است. In this life, this trap that's called life, happiness, is very, very, very rare. If you really want to have a great taste of happiness and joy, go to one of those journals that you have kept hidden when you were broken. Find a poem that you wrote. And when, because you were inspired, and that poem just oozed out of you, read that poem. And you'll be amazed, you'll love it. But it came out of pain, out of disappointment. And if you can make the suffering of life poetic, you can be happy. But your happiness is rooted in the ocean of sadness and sorrow. عشق در دریای غم غمناک نیست. If you know how to swim in the ocean of sorrow, it's no longer sorrowful. You're focused on swimming. Read Walt Whitman. Read Henry David Thoreau. Read Angela Davis. It's beautiful. The problem with this culture is you don't have myths, you don't have narratives that protect you when life falls apart. It's all about be positive, positive thinking. Are you kidding? The human race has been negative for the past 50 million years. All of a sudden, America knows something that other cultures didn't know. That's what happens when you're young. Listen, I don't want to bore you or depress you any more than I already have. Today's Wednesday. We'll get together again next week, Monday. Have a nice weekend. Stay safe. Just in case you run into some reflective issues, feel free to email. Say hello to your parents. Have a good evening. Take good care.